To this developing story now, the plan to salvage embattled SAA has now been approved. The focus has now been shifted to where the money will come from to execute that business rescue plan. Now, the Department of Public Enterprises has told business rescue practitioners that a letter confirming the receipt of funding will be provided by today. The big question now is whether that amount will be enough. We're told the amount is 10.4 billion rand. And if further cash injections will be needed as the national carrier moves to establish a new airline that is an attractive prospect for equity partners. Let's unpack the story now. We're joined by aviation expert Linden Birns, who I'm sure has been tracking the story very closely. Linden, so a bit of surprise, I suppose, in the sector that that plan was adopted, just given how much of toing and froing had gone in the months before. But this is just the first step. Where do we now get the money from?
Hi, Michelle. Good morning, and to all the viewers. So, was I surprised? No, because it wasn't a straight one credit or 1 rand, one vote. The votes were weighted. So, according to the amount of money the creditors thought you owed, or thought the airline owed you, gave you a certain proportion or percentage of the vote. And the banks, because they were owed the most, although there were only 4 or 5 of them, they carried 60% of the vote, even though they were being paid out in full, whereas all of the other creditors who were only getting 7.5 cents for every rand only had fractions of a vote. So it was always going to be a tough ask to get the 75% threshold if anybody wanted to shoot down the plan. The question now really is to say, where's the money going to come from? And this is going to be a test of resolve, I think, for Treasury, because they drew a very clear line in the sand a few days ago saying absolutely no money for SAA. And Minister Mboweni went further in the budget, in the interim budget speech, saying not only no money for SAA, but not for any other SOEs at all apart from the land bank. And they also said, the business rescue practitioners said in the creditors meeting that they will not be going to lenders to ask for the money again. So it raises the question, where's it coming from? And public enterprises are suggesting that there are potential investors lined up, that they've had unsolicited expressions of interest, quote unquote. Now, we don't know how credible they are. You or I could walk into a Ferrari dealership tomorrow and express an interest in, oh, that's a nice car, can I go for a drive? But neither of us may be able to afford to actually buy the car. We're just interested. So we don't know how serious they are. But it does raise another question, which is governments and public enterprises' entire position on SAA and on the rescue all along has been an ideological one that the state must own and control the airline to fulfill a development mandate. But now if they're talking about relinquishing ownership and control of the airline, it suggests that they're no longer wedded to that particular philosophy. And the question has to be asked then, why do we then need to burden the taxpayer beyond what we're already committed to? Why not then close the airline down and let whoever wants to invest start an airline from scratch without burdening all of us with that cost? And if you want to fulfill the development mandate, in other words, providing air connections for smaller towns, thinner routes, the ones that would be more marginal to operate for a commercial airline, well, governments elsewhere around the world manage to do that by using other instruments like an essential air service program, where the government puts those routes out to tender and the airlines bid for them, and the airline says, right, this is the maximum that you can charge a fare on those routes, and the government then provides a subsidy to the airline to top up to cover the cost. So there's no reason why we couldn't do something similar here, and that would save an enormous amount of money, because we wouldn't have to also burden the cost of have the burden of owning and operating an airline. We could just put it out to tender.
So, I mean, a lot of issues that you're bringing up there, Linden, and I guess the question always is, when we talk about SAA and these plans to, now rejig SAA in its current form, come up with a new prospect of a new airline as a national carrier, again, there are questions around whether this is indeed a vanity project? I mean, obviously there are concerns about the jobs that will no doubt be lost if SAA were to fold.
Well,
but at what cost are we still trying to keep this project alive?
Well, it's interesting you raise the job issue because, SAA is only one element of an entire aviation, air transport and tourism sector in this country, which actually employs well over or close to 500,000 people at the very least. So that's a conservative estimate if you think about everybody in that chain, from the airlines, the airports, the air traffic controllers, all the way through to rental cars, hotels, restaurants, you name it, convention centers. And everybody else, every other element of the sector is struggling at the moment. They're all on their knees. They all desperately need help, including several state-owned entities like the Airports Company, the Air Traffic Navigation Service, the Weather Service, as well as the South African Civil Aviation Authority. And you cannot have a functioning airline without functioning airports, air traffic management systems, etc. And also, there's no point in throwing a lot of money at just one airline. What's happening to the rest of the tourism sector? Where's the support for the rest of the industry and all of those jobs that are at risk? Far more than just the 3,000 that are set to go at SAA.
So, Linden, I'm just looking at the Business Day's front page, and it's talking about this issue around, where the money will now come from. The headline here says, Gordon passes SAA hot potato to Mboweni. And the article here has reached out to Treasury to say, the vote has been successful, it's adopted the business rescue plan. What about this 10.4 billion rand? And Treasury not wanting to make any statement as yet. But I mean, what happens if we don't get that letter from that letter of concurrence? And what happens then for business rescue practitioners and creditors and the future of SAA ultimately? It's not the end of the road. We might still see SAA at a point of liquidation.
So the next phase, my understanding of the process now is that government have today is the deadline for putting up a letter confirming that it will commit the funding to fund the rescue. It's got to be a letter both from DPE and Treasury. If that's not been forthcoming, then by the 22nd, which is next week, the rescue practitioners have to then call another creditors meeting on the 24th, where they will discuss, do they need to make further amendments? If the creditors do not agree, then the rescue practitioners have to declare the plan unimplementable, refer it back to the court, and the court then has to begin the liquidation proceedings.
Linden, just as a parting shot from you, if you were in control of the situation at SAA, would you find that 10.4 billion rand, or would you call it a day?
Look, the problem is it's not actually clear whether it's for SAA to now go and find the money, and how would it? Because it's technically bankrupt. Yeah. It's in business rescue because it doesn't have the cash and hasn't been able to raise more cash. And it requires, if it's going to get cash, any creditor, any lender is going to want a guarantee from the government, and the government's not been willing to provide further guarantees. We're already in hock to 16.4 billion, which has to be paid out pretty soon. So it's a tough one. And the other question, though, is based on what assumptions can you even begin to think about paying it back? Because you don't know when you're going to be able to start generating revenue.
And I mean, when was the last time SAA made a profit? Was it? I was reading it was 2009. The last time SAA made a profit.
Yeah, 2011. But the issue is we just don't know when the lockdowns are going to finish and when borders will open and when we can start flying. So how do you know when you can start generating revenue? And what's the demand going to be like? And this business plan that they voted on yesterday says that it's going to take 3 to 4 years for the airline to turn a profit, which is a very handy time frame because it also says that the creditors will only be paid back over the first 3 years if there's money available. But they may not even get paid anyway, especially if the airline, if those projections that are in the business plan turn out to not be realistic. And I think people have got some serious doubts about the plausibility of those projections.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredibly difficult situation. Thanks very much for your time, Linden. Thanks for helping us To understand this incredibly difficult story here, Linden Birns is an aviation expert. He's also managing director of Plain Talking, and he tells us that that deadline for that letter of concurrence from Treasury and the Department of Public Enterprises, the deadline is today. That is now the next step since the business rescue plan was adopted just yesterday.